Manju dived right in. Hmm. Yeah, we were doing the different values.
Okay, I'm muting and
Huh? I mean, hmm.
में हमारे साथ जोड़ा रहता है और जोड़ने में उनका कार्य और जो उस
Right. We were talking about how when we identify each other, the basis on which we identify the other is the basis on which we relate to the other. And if both parties accept the kind of identification the other party has made of themselves and vice versa, then we are able to evaluate it and find it to be mutually fulfilling and able to continue that relationship.
जो जोड़ा हुआ को स्वीकारने का कार्य हमारे साथ जुड़ा रहता है, फलस्वरूप हम उतने ही अच्छे ढंग से हम पहचाने रहते हैं एक दूसरे को, फलस्वरूप उसी के अनुसार हम वो मूल्यांकित करते हैं, माने मूल्यों का निर्माण.
So based on how we identify, we remain associated with each other. That is how we relate with each other. And based on that, we live out the values and evaluate the values associated with the relationship we've identified.
निर्वाह करते हैं, जो स्नेह को निर्वाह करे, चाहे गौरव को निर्वाह करें, चाहे कृतज्ञता को गौरव निर्वाह करें, किसी न किसी चीज को हम निर्वाह करते हैं.
So whether it is affection that we are living out, whether it is admiration we are living out, whether it is gratitude we're living out, one or the other of these we do live out with whoever we relate to, that we identify as our relation.
ऐसा सोचना चाहिए.
This is how we should think.
तो ये क्रम को हम अच्छी ढंग से देख चुके हैं, इसमें हम गुजर चुके हैं. हमारा जो अनुभव ये कहता है, तो हमारा पहचान हम जहाँ-जहाँ स्थापित करते हैं, वहाँ हमारा संबंध अपने आप में पहचाना हुआ रहता ही है.
So this sequence is something that I have seen very well, I have been through very well, and my experience tells me that wherever I have established my identity, over there in all those areas, I am able to be recognized in that relationship, I think is what he said.
जहाँ-जहाँ स्थापित करते हैं, वहाँ हमारा संबंध अपने आप में पहचाना हुआ रहता ही है.
Right. So wherever I'm able to establish my identity in all those spaces, my relationship is recognized. One second.
सिद्ध बात इतनी ही है. वही चीज हर व्यक्ति के साथ जुड़ा है. आपके साथ मैं अपना पहचान को हम पहचानवा देते हैं, आप भी पहचानवाते हैं. फलस्वरूप
That is the straightforward fact. And this very same thing is what happens with every one of us. Whatever your identity, how did he say it?
सिद्ध बात इतनी ही है. वही चीज हर व्यक्ति के साथ जुड़ा है. आपके साथ मैं अपना पहचान को हम पहचानवा देते हैं, आप भी पहचानवाते हैं. फलस्वरूप
With you, I make my identity recognizable to you, and you also make your identity recognizable or identifiable to me.
बाप हमारा बीच में मैत्री होना स्वाभाविक हो जाता है, संबंध को पहचानना स्वाभाविक हो जाता है.
And on the basis of this, it becomes natural for there to emerge a sort of friendship between the two of us, and for there to emerge a relationship between the two of us.
बीच में मैत्री होना स्वाभाविक हो जाता है, संबंध को पहचानना स्वाभाविक हो जाता है.
नहीं, not the relationship to emerge, it becomes natural to be able to recognize the relationship between the two of us. So on my establishing my identity in front of you and you helping you recognize my identity and you doing the same with me, it becomes natural for us to feel a sort of affinity or friendship with each other and for us to be able to recognize the relationship, a relationship with each other.
इस ढंग से संबंध को पहचाना जाता है. अभी
In this way, it is in this way that relationships are recognized.
पहले बात तो अभ्युदय के अर्थ में ही है, उसके बाद पोषण के अर्थ में है, उसके बाद संरक्षण के अर्थ में है, और ये इन अर्थों में सारा संबंध जुड़ी हुई.
So first and foremost, the relationships are in the direction of actualization. Then after that, they're in the direction of care and nourishment, sorry. Then they're in the direction of protection and security. And in these directions, all the relationships are, it is in these directions that all of these relationships exist.
में है, और ये इन अर्थों में सारा संबंध जुड़ी हुई.
It is in these directions that all the relationships are associated.
और सबसे बड़ी जो बात है प्रामाणिकता के अर्थ में संबंध. तो प्रमाण जो है,
And the biggest of them all is relationships in the direction of authenticity, in the direction of evidencing. Authenticity is evidencing.
सर्वोपरि वरीयता की बात है. प्रमाण के आधार पर हर व्यक्ति संतुष्ट होता ही. ठीक है.
This is of the utmost importance, the topmost in the order of hierarchy of importance, you could say, or priority, because with evidence or with authenticity, each and every one feels fulfilled.
बात है प्रमाण के आधार पर हर व्यक्ति संतुष्ट होता ही. ठीक है. ये जो संतुष्ट होने वाली बात हमको समझ में आता है, इसको हम एक जगह में नहीं, अनेक जगह में, एक देश में नहीं, अनेक देश में, एक परिवार में नहीं, अनेक परिवार में अपन प्रयोग करके देख सकते हैं.
And this thing about feeling fulfilled is something that we can experiment and test out in not just one place, but in several places, not just in one location, but in many locations, not just in one family, but in several families. We can experiment and test this thing of fulfillment out.
ये मुख्य बात संबंधों के बारे में अपने को स्वीकारने की आवश्यकता है.
This is the major point that we need to accept with regards to relationships.
और मूल्यों को भी, मूल्य जो है ना, जीवन सहज रूप में वो उद्गमित होता है.
And these values, you see, are things that emerge in a natural way from the Jeevan, or in a way that is they emerge very naturally in the Jeevan.
जैसा आपका हमारा संबंध, इसमें किसी को बोलने की जरूरत नहीं है. तो आप हमें मिलते हैं, स्वाभाविक रूप में एक मूल्य जो बहना चाहिए, विश्वास, वो.
For instance, your relationship with me. No one needs to say anything about it. When I meet you, on very spontaneously on its own, this value flows from me.
तो आप हमें मिलते हैं, स्वाभाविक रूप में एक मूल्य जो बहना चाहिए, विश्वास, वो आप हमारे बीच में अपने आप से शुरू हो जाता है. इसके लिए बहुत सारा हम कहीं.
So when we meet, the value that should be flowing between us, that is trust or confidence, starts to flow very naturally between the two of us.
जो बहना चाहिए, विश्वास, वो आप हमारे बीच में अपने आप से शुरू हो जाता है. इसके लिए बहुत सारा हम कहीं भी कोई तप नहीं किया, कोई बड़ी भारी साधना नहीं किया, और बिना ही इन सभी बात की हमारे साथ आपका, आपके साथ मेरा पहचान बनने के लिए योग्य ये एक तरीका है, अपने आप से निष्पन्न होती है। उसमें ये मूल्य समाया ही रहता है, विश्वास समाया ही रहता है, तभी हम संबंधों को पहचानना बन जाती है।
So this happens spontaneously and naturally when we meet. And for this, I have
ये
for this I have not done any great penance or any great sort of meditations in order for this to occur. This happens. I'll have to listen to it again exactly to see what he's saying.
उसमें ये मूल्य समाया ही रहता है, अपने आप से निष्पन्न होती है। उसमें ये मूल्य समाया ही रहता है, विश्वास समाया ही रहता है, तभी हम के लिए योग्य की हमारे साथ आपका, आपके साथ मेरा पहचान बनने के लिए योग्य ये एक तरीका है, अपने आप से निष्पन्न होती है। उसमें ये मूल्य समाया।
I have not done any great penance or meditations for this trust to flow between us. It is based on this recognition and identification that it is inherent. When this happens, this value is inherent in the process of identification.
पहचान बनने के लिए योग्य ये एक तरीका है, अपने आप से निष्पन्न होती है। उसमें ये मूल्य समाया ही रहता है,
पहचान बनने के लिए योग्य. So this is the way which is capable of being, by this way in which we become capable of recognizing the other, in that this value of trust is innate, it is inherent to this process of recognition.
विश्वास समाया ही रहता है, तभी हम संबंधों को पहचानना बन जाती है।
So this confidence or trust remains imbued in this, and that is why it becomes possible for us to recognize relationships.
ये इस विधि से हम अच्छी तरह से हम मूल्यों को पहचानने, संबंधों को पहचानने, मूल्यांकन करने और उभय तृप्ति पाने की रास्ता अपना सकते हैं। तो इससे क्या हो गया?
And in this way, we can very easily we can very easily adopt this method of recognizing relationships, of living out the values, of evaluating the relationships, and then feeling mutually fulfilled.
पहचानने, मूल्यांकन करने और उभय तृप्ति पाने की रास्ता अपना सकते हैं। तो इससे क्या हो गया भाई? बहुत बड़ा लाभ क्या हो गया? इससे कौन सा लाभ हो जाएगा? लाभ यह हो जाएगा, भय और प्रलोभन के आधार पर हर बात को हम मूल्यांकन करते रहे, उसके स्थान पर मूल्य और मूल्यांकन से माने मूल्यांकित करने की स्थिति में हम आ जाते हैं।
So what will this lead to? This leads to a very great, it leads to this very great advantage, this very great benefit, that up till now we have been in the state of evaluating everything on the basis of fear and greed. But now we can evaluate on the basis of values and evaluation. So basically now our evaluation can be value based rather than fear and greed based. And this is the state that we reach.
माने मूल्यांकित करने की स्थिति में हम आ जाते हैं। तो मुख्य मुद्दा मानव परंपरा में मूल्यों को पहचानना, मूल्यों को मूल्यांकित करना।
So the major issue within the human tradition is recognizing values and evaluating values.
इसी में हम सदा सदा परेशान होते रहे हैं। तो भय और प्रलोभन के साथ हम जितने भी व्यवस्थाओं में, संबंधों में, कार्य संबंधों में, व्यवसाय संबंधों में, व्यवहार संबंधों में कितने भी हम मूल्यांकन किए, तो मूल्यांकन करते हैं तो वो एक प्रकार से राजी गाजी होने की जैसा ही।
And it is in this that we have remained troubled, because when, however much we have been trying to evaluate on the basis of fear and greed, whether it is in our what are the different kind of relationships he named?
व्यवस्थाओं में, संबंधों में, कार्य संबंधों में, व्यवसाय संबंधों में, व्यवहार संबंधों में कितने भी हम,
however much we have tried to evaluate on the basis of fear and greed in our institutions, in our relationships, in our work relationships, in our behavioral, interpersonal relationships, or in our occupational relationships, no matter how much we have tried to evaluate in this way,
मूल्यांकन किए, तो मूल्यांकन करते हैं तो वो एक प्रकार से राजी गाजी होने की जैसा ही होता रहा। मूल्यांकन तो होता ही नहीं रहा। भय और प्रलोभन।
What is Raji Gaji? Do you know exactly?
Not sure, but it's like Razi Hona is
Agreement.
agreeing.
Huh. It's like, is it like convincing ourselves? So you're saying because whenever we've been trying to do some, to evaluate based on fear and greed in all these relationships, we have had actually not been able to do any sort of evaluation. We've only been able to do this Raji Gaji, which seems like he's saying we've only been able to convince ourselves and others. It
You're
seems
correct,
like
correct.
that's what you think.
And I'm guessing Raji Gazi is like this, convincing like somehow, because Gajan in Hindi, Gajna means chillana something. So like जैसे तैसे सब किसी को मना लिया कुछ करने के लिए. Somehow
Right.
you reached an agreement.
Right. Convincing rhetoric and something like basically artful convincing of ourselves and others, somehow or the other, but through whatever means necessary. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, through this method of fear and greed, we have only been able to achieve some sort of rhetorical convincing of ourselves and of others, and there has never actually been any sort of evaluation.
कभी भी मूल्य होता नहीं है, ना मूल्यांकन होता है। भय के साथ प्रलोभन, प्रलोभन के साथ भय, कहीं ना कहीं थोड़ा देर के लिए चुप होने वाली बात आती।
Right. So with fear and greed, never is there any value, nor is there any evaluation. With fear along with greed, or greed along with fear, it is only that one of the two will be quietened down for a little bit over the other, or one would maybe what does he say, एक के साथ दूसरा चुप कराने की।
भय के साथ प्रलोभन, प्रलोभन के साथ भय, कहीं ना कहीं थोड़ा देर के लिए चुप होने वाली बात आती है। रोग वहीं का वहीं रहता है।
हाँ, so somewhere or the other, it is only about quieting or silencing one or the other in the other's favor. It is not that they have disappeared. They never disappear.
इस आधार पर हम आती है। रोग वहीं का वहीं रहता है।
Sorry. The ailment remains there where it was.
इस आधार पर हम भय और प्रलोभन से छुटकारा पाना बना ही नहीं है।
So on this basis, we have never been able to rid ourselves of fear and greed. Fear or greed.
ये स्वयं इस बात का गवाही है हम कितने समझदार हुए हैं। ये इस बात का गवाही है हम मानव परंपरा कितना हम समझदार हुए। शिक्षा संस्कार
And this itself is testimony to the fact of just how intelligent or just how knowledgeable we have become. This is the testimony to the fact that the human tradition, just how knowledgeable the human tradition has been.
संस्कार कितना समझदारी को आदमी को दे पाया और व्यवस्था में कितना हम मनुष्य को मूल्यांकित कर पाया, ये सब बात का द्योतक है, ये प्रमाण।
It is testimony to just what the educational institutes have been able to give to humankind, or how much our systems have been able to support human living.
मनुष्य को मूल्यांकित कर पाया, ये सब बात का संस्कार कितना समझदारी को आदमी को दे पाया और व्यवस्था में कितना हम मनुष्य को मूल्यांकित कर पाया।
Right. So it is testimony to just how much our educational and sanskar institutions were able to give to humankind, and just how much they were able to evaluate humans in terms of order and systems.
ये सब बात का द्योतक है, ये प्रमाण है, गवाही है, जीता जागता गवाही है।
It is the indicator, the witness of all of these facts. It is the living testimony and witness of all of these facts. What is it? It is the fact that we have not been able to rid ourselves of fear and greed. How do we know that? Because if we are not evaluating, then in any situation if we're not evaluating on the basis of values, because we are not feeling or living the values, then in any situation, our basis of any evaluation, so to speak, not real evaluation, is only our fear or our greed. So since the fact that we are still being governed by fear and greed is the indicator of just how much our educational systems have failed humankind.
तो शताब्दियों से, सहस्राब्दियों से हम भय और प्रलोभन के छाया छत्र में हम मृग तृष्णा मरीचिका को लेकर हम चलते ही रहे। इसमें
So for several centuries, for hundreds of centuries, for thousands of centuries, we have been carrying the something of fear and greed with us as we walk. And what is it that we said? Kya marichika? Marichika is mirage.
हम मृग तृष्णा मरीचिका को लेकर
Something Krishna. Mriga Trishna? Marichika? I have heard this term, I've just forgotten what it means. He's basically saying we've been carrying this mirage or this Mriga Trishna of fear and greed. Let me just find out what it was. मृग तृष्णा, ऐसी तृष्णा जो प्राय संभव ना हो, मृग मारीचिका. Okay, so the thirst of the peacock, which means a sort of thirst that can never be quenched. So yeah, it's basically, we have been carrying with us this illusion, this delusion of fear and greed, this mirage of fear and greed with us for the past thousands of centuries.
हम चलते ही रहे। इसमें ये भी बात स्पष्ट हो जाती है, प्रलोभन की आपूर्ति के लिए ही हम सदा सदा राजी किए हैं, किसी से भी।
And this also establishes this the fact that it is for the quenching of our greed that we have for all these years been convincing ourselves.
राजी किया, प्रलोभन के आशय से ही किए हैं, और कुछ करने की कोई मतलब ही नहीं है, क्योंकि न्यायालय में न्याय की बात पूरा हुआ नहीं है।
Right. So whenever we have been able to convince anyone, it has been through this means of greed or what's the temptation. Why? Because there has been no space for even for justice, even in our courts of justice. There has been no room for justice, even in the highest courts of justice. So that indicates that all that we have been doing is convincing on the basis of temptation or greed.
Krishna,
और
can I
ये
bring
भय
in
और
can I bring in one another connotation of this Mrig Krishna, which I feel is, so there's this famous thing that Mrig, I have to check, but I think this is it might mean Krishna is basically what thirst, right? Like you said, Mrig Krishna is basically unquenchable because Mrig keeps looking for this thing called Kasturi, which is in its own neck.
Oh,
The smell of it, and it's
oh, right.
continuously looking for it, right?
Mrig is
उसकी
deer,
नाभि में होती है. Mrig
not
is deer.
peacock.
Not peacock. Mrig is continuously looking for the kasturi, and that is the thirst. And
Yes,
it's never quenched because it's within. So
right,
it's always looking for it outside, but it's inside. So
right,
that might be it.
right. I remember now we had this shlok in class 8th where they taught us about this deer which has a scented sac in its belly, and
Belly,
it
yeah.
smells this scent and it wants to find it, and it keeps searching everywhere but it can't find it because it doesn't realize that it's within its own belly. So yeah, that's what he's calling it. I think that's why he's saying because the root of all our fear and our temptations is our own illusion. So whenever we try to quench it from the outside, it won't be quenched. We have to basically rid ourselves of our illusions, find the values, and that way we won't even be affected by any sort of fears or temptation. We don't need to keep catering to our fears and greed after that. Right. Where were we in this?
किया प्रलोभन के आशय से ही किए हैं और कुछ करने की कोई मतलब ही नहीं है क्योंकि न्यायालय में न्याय की बात पूरा हुआ नहीं है.
So whenever we have been able to convince about anything, it has been with the intent of temptation, with the intent of greed, because there is no possibility for anything else. Since even in the courts of justice, there is no conversation on actual justice.
और ये भय और प्रलोभन के आधार में कोई न्याय मिलने वाला नहीं है, कभी नहीं मिलने वाला है, तो ये दोनों न्याय का कोई आधार होता भी नहीं है.
And on the basis of this fear and greed or fear and temptation, there is never going to be any sort of justice. We're never going to find any justice because it can be no basis for justice, this fear and greed.
कभी नहीं मिलने वाला है, तो ये दोनों न्याय का कोई आधार होता भी नहीं है, किंतु हम पकड़े बैठे हैं डंडा भय और प्रलोभन को पकड़ के बैठे हैं. ये एक बहुत बड़ी भारी मुद्दा है जिसको अपने स्वनिरीक्षण करने में, स्वनिरीक्षण का मतलब परंपरा रूपी स्वनिरीक्षण करने में ये एक बहुत बड़ी भारी मुद्दा है.
Right. So yeah, because neither of these can form the basis for justice, and yet we have held on to these supports. So this in itself is a very big, a very major issue that is a major issue for our self-reflection. That is our self-reflection in terms of tradition. We have to, he's saying that it is an issue for us to reflect on in terms of the tradition we are carrying. So it is still a reflection on tradition, but it is a self-reflection on tradition. It's not about pointing fingers at the tradition because we are the carriers of tradition also.
तो इस निष्कर्ष में शायद है आप हम सब सम्मत हैं, भय और प्रलोभन ना तो मूल्य होता है, मूल्यांकन का नहीं तो आधार हो पाता है.
And on this conclusion, perhaps all of us are in agreement that neither fear nor greed are any value, and nor can they form any basis for evaluation.
परिस्थिति के अनुसार हम सम्मत हो पाते हैं, नहीं हो पाते हैं, इतने के लिए भय और प्रलोभन होता है। भय से भी कुछ मुद्दे पर हम सम्मत होते हुए इतिहास है, और
Sorry, I did not catch that.
प्रलोभन ना तो मूल्य होता है, मूल्यांकन का नहीं तो आधार हो पाता है। परिस्थिति के अनुसार हम सम्मत हो पाते हैं, नहीं हो पाते हैं, इतने के लिए भय और प्रलोभन होता है।
It is परिस्थिति के अनुसार. It is in accordance with situations. It is circumstantial. Whether we feel in agreement or in disagreement based on fear or greed. Otherwise, if the situation or the circumstance don't allow, then we also are in disagreement.
भय से भी कुछ मुद्दे पर हम सम्मत होते हुए इतिहास है, और प्रलोभन से भी सम्मत होता हुआ इतिहास है। मानव का इतिहास
there is also a history of us agreeing on the basis of fear, and there is also history of humans agreeing on the basis of greed. There is a historical record of both such sorts of agreements.
इतने में सिमटा है, से भी सम्मत होता हुआ इतिहास है। मानव का इतिहास इतने में सिमटा है। तो मानव अभी
And the history of humanity can be reduced, can be boiled down to this much, that sometimes we have been agreement on the basis of our fear, sometimes we have agreed on the basis of our greed. Yet both of these sorts of agreements have been circumstantial.
तक मूल्यों के पास गए ही नहीं। मूल्यों के पास होता, मूल्य यदि अभिव्यक्ति होता, मूल्य प्रमाणित होता, मूल्यांकन का स्थिति आती, स्वाभाविक रूप में न्यायालयों में न्याय होता।
Because we have never, this is the history of humankind. The history of humankind can be boiled down to this, because humans have never gone towards values. Had they gone towards values, then there would have been, then the values would have existed, the values would have been expressed, the values could have been evaluated, and there would have been justice.
होता, मूल्यांकन का स्थिति आती, स्वाभाविक रूप में न्यायालयों में न्याय होता।
And very naturally there would have been justice in the courts of justice.
और फैसला काय को होती?
Why would there have been decisions rather than justice?
फैसला करते हैं न्यायालयों में, न्याय नहीं करते हैं। न्याय का कोई आधार ही नहीं है।
It is decisions, it is verdicts that are passed in the courts of law. It is not justice that is meant. Because there is no basis of justice. Wait, Manjuji, I think dropped out. In that meantime, I just want to find it. Got some pretty nice translation for this difference between justice and decision in the book. Yes, of course. The judicial courts pass judgments, they don't do justice. फैसला करते हैं, वो न्याय नहीं करते। So it's getting recorded. Hopefully we should be able to.
वे स्वाभाविक बात है, जो एक से अधिक पक्ष के बीच में तो न्यायालय की हस्तक्षेप है, वो जैसा अपने स्वविवेक, संविधान, ये सब मिल करके जो करना है कर देते हैं। उसमें एक it is judgments that are made in courts of law today, not justice that is being done. And what is it? जैसा अपने स्वविवेक, संविधान में तो न्यायालय की हस्तक्षेप है, वो जैसा जो एक से अधिक पक्ष के, जो इसमें स्वाभाविक बात है, जो एक से अधिक पक्ष के बीच में तो न्यायालय की हस्तक्षेप है, वो जैसा अपने स्वविवेक, संविधान, ये सब मिल करके जो करना है कर देते हैं। उसमें एक मजबूरन एक आदमी सम्मत होता है, एक आदमी तो अपने प्रलोभनवश वो सम्मत हो जाता है, एक भयवश, एक प्रलोभनवश।
Right. So what happens in these situations today when there is no justice happening is that there is between the two parties involved, the court of justice, because there are always two parties in which our courts intervene. They, based on their own personal wisdom, their constitution, or whatever it may be, they declare a verdict, they declare a judgment. And regarding that judgment, one party agrees because of their temptation, and the other party disagrees because of their fear. I mean, sorry, doesn't disagree. One person is pleased with such a judgment and agrees with it due to their temptation. The other party is displeased but agrees with it due to their fear.
होता है, उभय तृप्ति तो इसमें कभी हुआ नहीं।
And mutual fulfillment is something that has never occurred in this process.
ना होना है,
And nor will it
इसका कोई
occur.
आसार ही नहीं है।
There is no
तो
possibility.
इस ढंग से हम न्याय को पाने में हम सर्वथा असमर्थ रहे हैं, और इसके बावजूद भी हम विकास की दावा करते रहे हैं। और विकास का क्या?
And in this way, we have been ever failures in accomplishing justice, and yet we have been ever claiming our success at development. What the basis of such claims is?
रहे हैं, और इसके बावजूद भी हम विकास की दावा करते रहे हैं। और विकास का क्या अर्थ होगा आप ही सोच लीजिए। ये सब सोचने की मुद्दा है।
Right. So in this way, we have forever been unsuccessful at achieving justice, and yet despite that, we have ever been claiming our success at development. What this development must mean is something you should think for yourself. This is something worth thinking about.
तो अभी न्याय पाने की सहज तरीका ये आती है, प्रयोजनों के आधार पर संबंधों को पहचानना।
So then the natural way of finding justice is that recognizing relationships in terms of purposes.
फलस्वरूप मूल्यों का स्वाभाविक रूप में निर्वाह होना, और इसके फलन में मूल्यांकित होना, उभय तृप्ति बना, दोनों में होना।
And as a consequence, the inherent values flowing from us very naturally, and as a natural consequence of that, those values being evaluated, and consequently, the mutual fulfillment of both parties. This is the natural way of finding justice.
ये किस परंपरा में होता है? समझदार परंपरा में होता है।
In which tradition does this happen? It happens in the knowledgeable tradition.
तो नासमझ परंपरा में ये नहीं होता है। नासमझ परंपरा में वही आता है, भय और प्रलोभन।
This does not occur in the what's a good word for nasamaj? Unknowledgeable. It does not occur in the unknowledgeable tradition. In the ignorant, right? It does not happen in the ignorant tradition of ignorance. In the ignorant tradition, we only find fear and greed.
भय और प्रलोभन कोई मूल्य होता है ना, मूल्यांकन हो पाता है। प्रलोभन का क्या मूल्यांकन करेंगे हम?
This sort of justice can only happen in the knowledgeable tradition. It cannot occur in the ignorant tradition, because in the ignorant tradition we only have access to fear and greed. And can fear and greed be evaluated? No, it cannot be. It is not. Is fear and greed a value? No, nor can it be evaluated. Can greed be evaluated in any way?
कुछ भी नहीं कर पाएंगे। भय का भी कुछ भी नहीं मूल्यांकन कर पाएंगे।
You will not be able to do it in any way, nor will you be able to evaluate fear in any way.
किंतु भयभीत होता हुआ आदमी को देखा जाता है, प्रलोभित होता हुआ आदमी को देखा जाता है। ये बात सही है।
However, we can see humans be fearful, and we can see humans being tempted. That is true.
इस क्रम में हम भय और प्रलोभन से छूटना एक बिल्कुल आवश्यकता रही है, नियति सहज है, और इससे मनुष्य का भी कल्याण है, नैसर्गिकता का भी कल्याण है।
In this way, in this sequence, we can understand that freeing ourselves from fear and greed is something that is very necessary. And it is in that the welfare of both humans as well as of nature lies.
से छूटना एक बिल्कुल आवश्यकता रही है, नियति सहज है, और इससे मनुष्य का भी कल्याण है, नैसर्गिकता का भी कल्याण है। नैसर्गिकता में जितने भी
So it is absolutely necessary to free ourselves. It is also natural. Niyati Sahaj literally means that it is natural to destiny, which means natural to our evolutionary destiny. That is what we are built to be freed of. We have evolved to free ourselves from this. So that is our evolutionary destiny also. That is our natural design. And it is also where the welfare of humanity lies, in freeing ourselves from fear and greed. Not only is that where our welfare lies, the welfare of humanity, but it is also where the welfare of the rest of the environment lies. Because basically, why is he saying that? Because it is out of our fear and greed that we've been destroying the planet also.
जो रोग दोष पैदा करते हैं आदमी, उसके संबंध में भी मानव सोचेगा, उसका तरीका सोचेगा, और उसके लिए अनुकूल परिस्थिति सोचेगा, नैसर्गिक संतुलन के लिए, और भी कल्याण। नैसर्गिकता में जितने भी जो रोग दोष पैदा करते हैं आदमी, उसके संबंध में भी मानव सोचेगा, उसका तरीका सोचेगा, और उसके लिए अनुकूल परिस्थिति सोचेगा।
So, on freeing ourselves from fear and greed, all the ailments and problems that we have caused to our environment will also be addressed, will also be thought about by humankind, will also be remedied, and as a consequence of that, we will be able to achieve natural environmental balance.
नैसर्गिक संतुलन के लिए, और मानव संतुलन के लिए, न्याय के लिए भी मनुष्य जो है ना, अपने को समझदारी के आधार पर प्रमाणित करेगा।
So that is for environmental balance that humans will be thinking. And then in terms of social balance, human balance, we will think in terms of justice.
भी मनुष्य जो है ना, अपने को समझदारी के आधार पर प्रमाणित करेगा। ये
You will think in terms of justice, and humans will be able to then evidence themselves based on their understanding. अरे
भी कल्याण। नैसर्गिकता में जितने भी जो रोग दोष पैदा करते हैं आदमी, उसके संबंध में भी मानव सोचेगा, उसका तरीका सोचेगा, और उसके लिए अनुकूल परिस्थिति सोचेगा, नैसर्गिक संतुलन के लिए, और मानव संतुलन के लिए
they'll think of the anukul paristhiti, the conducive situations for fixing the ailments that we have caused in the environment. And for human balance,
न्याय के लिए भी मनुष्य जो है ना, अपने को समझदारी के आधार पर,
and as for human balance, that is for justice, or that for that as well, humans will evidence themselves on the basis of understanding.
प्रमाणित करेगा। ये
Okay, इतना ही है।
Over.
Over. Yeah. This was the end of 12 at last. We'll finally move on to 13.
Okay. We'll move on tomorrow.
Hmm.
Good way to end, no?
Yeah, yeah. Unless you have anything to say, Manjuji?
No, tomorrow we start on 13.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have Thursday, Friday, then we are pausing now for long.
Yeah, yeah. Because Monday
Achha,
we'll meet.
after this Friday, we are pausing, huh?
Yeah, yeah.